Futures research is not a science. Futures research is an art. It's systematic, so it has a feeling of science, but believe me, it is not science, because to be science, anyone using the techniques that will form the basis of our discussion this afternoon, anyone using that techniques would come up with the same answer. And people practicing these techniques in futures research come up with different answers. So there's a lot of personal bias, a lot of bias, personal or otherwise, a lot of attitude, a lot of experience that goes into forming this field of futures research. Systematic, we can hope for. Science is beyond our ability so far. That doesn't mean it's not useful. It is very useful to try and answer the question, what is going to happen? Why is it useful? Because it can affect policy. If we don't make the link between futures research and policy, we're writing science fiction. There'll be reports that go up on the shelf, and 10 years later you can go back and say, see, we told you, and get some kind of psychic reward from that, but it hasn't changed the world. It hasn't done anything. It sat there inertly. So if there is one message I want to put across for today, it is this. Futures research is an input to planning. It is an input to policy making. And that is its purpose for existence. That's the reason we spend time on it, so that we can illuminate those things that have to be said in order to make more informed policy. Informed policy is what we're about. Futures research is a component of policy research. It is an input to policy research. So when we talk about futures research, we can end the discussion there, but if we're really honest, we should carry the discussion into decision making. What is it that decision makers ought to know, have to know, in order to make better decisions? Part of the answer to that question is something about the future. Tell me what's going to happen. Tell me what the future environment is in which my decision will reach fruition. And it's that link, which I hope I can make for you before the afternoon is over, that I think is most important to remember. When futures research really began, I'm taking us back, the modern incarnation of futures research began back in the 60s at Rand, primarily. Computers were just coming on the scene. So the hope among us that were doing the experiments back then was that as computers got better and bigger and faster, we'd be able to build bigger and better and faster databases, and equations would flow out, and the machines would crank out whatever it was we wanted them to crank out. I'll tell you that that image has now evaporated for a number. And then about the same time, expert studies. At Rand, in the early 60s, the idea was, we could get a handle on the future this way. If experts were to agree about some aspect of the future, don't you think that would be some insight into the future? So they ran a series of experiments in which they brought experts together in conference rooms like this, and they posed the question, all right, all of you, what are the weapons of the future going to be? And you're a ballistics expert, you're an aerodynamics expert, you're a thermodynamics expert, and the idea was that the melding of these skills and orientations would produce an answer that was worth listening to. But what happened when the experts came together in a conference room was something other than a true debate about the issue. It had to do with personalities, it had to do with who published most recently on a given topic, it had to do with who was the boss, and who could express their ideas more concisely and persuasively than who else. It was wrong. It didn't lead to the kind of consensus that they were after. So the people who invented Delphi, largely Olaf Helmer and Norm Dahlke, reasoned this way. Let's keep these people anonymous to one another. Let's not have them meet. Let's deal with them through an intermediary. and we'll conduct this debate through an intermediary. Answer the question, what future weapons do you think will be on the table by the year 2000? You give me your answer from your perspective, your answer from your perspective, and then in a second round, we feed it back, and we say in the second round, here are the weapon systems that came out of that first round. When do you think they will happen? And we get a range of dates back. And then in the third round, why do you think it's so early or so late? And the reasons for early or late, you see, this is kind of building up that debate, are then fed back in the fourth round, where the question is, now given these reasons, do you now still think that it will be that early or that late? And gradually the consensus emerges. Back in those days, consensus was everything. You measured the success of a Delphi study based on the degree to which you got a consensus. Well, that was fake, because the people who were the outliers were made to do more work. So it was easier for them to move toward the consensus than to give the reasons why they wanted to maintain their extreme positions. But nevertheless, that was interesting, important, and that first RAND study in 1964 sparked the whole series of Delphis. How many have been done since then? Thousands, on all topics. Any topic that you mentioned, someone somewhere has done a Delphi study, for better or for worse. Scenarios came next, very important technique that permits us to grapple a bit with uncertainty, as I'll show you in a few minutes. Very well developed, widely used, and lookout panels, an adaptation of Delphi, came on the scene about them. Normative visions became another topic of focus. Can we build scenarios that are normative in some systematic way? The answer is yes. And now at the top upper right-hand corner, we see complexity, the challenge to Newtonianism. I can build a deterministic model, which gives me an unpredictable, in a sense, an unpredictable future. I will show you before we're done this afternoon an equation which looks so simple, and it has only one coefficient in it that I can change the crank up or crank down, and by cranking it up or cranking it down, I can give you a time series which is non-repeatable forever, and yet it is deterministic. In other words, if I knew that equation and the value of that coefficient, I could predict it exactly. It is deterministic. But by looking at the historical data, I have no clue about what the future is going to be. This is the challenge of complex systems to the Newtonian idea of the clockwork universe. And we're dealing with complex systems. There's nothing that we deal with that is as simple as F equals ma. And therefore, we come full cycle. We've said the future is thinkable, it feeds into decisions, and all we've got to do is build bigger computers. We built the bigger computers, and they told us we were on the wrong track. There's no such thing as a singular future. If there were a singular future, then we would be under then there would be no free will, no determinism, no ability for decisions to make a difference. Doesn't matter what you decide. I know what that future is going to be. It is a future. So it is very much a mark of this field to be talking in terms of multiple futures. And which future emerges is a function of decision-making, a function of policy. We want the future that is the better future, and we're going to invent policy that changes the probability of events and leads us that way. There's the linkage. I'm making it for you already between decision-making and futures. That there are many futures. They flow from history. The odds of them differ. Some events are unknowable and discontinuous. Bear on that for a minute. There's a limit to futures research, no matter how sophisticated we get. There are unknowable, not just unknown, waiting to be discovered, but intrinsically unknowable events. That's an important recognition. It gives us a little humility at the start of this activity. Sure, we talked about terrorism before, but hijacking 4 airplanes? Unknowable, at least unknowable to most of the people in the world. Few people knew about that. A breakthrough in science. Take Hans Strassmann and the discovery of atomic disintegration, fission. Before Hans and Strassmann made that discovery, how could anyone have talked about atomic energy? And there are a lot of areas like that today. We need a discovery in gravity before we can talk about anti-gravity. There are a lot of people working on that, and we can look at that, but until the paradigm is in place that says, yes, this is feasible, the forecast will be absent, or if not absent, scoffed at. This came from a study that we did for the FBI at one time in the Futures Group. And the question was introducing new computers into the detection and analysis of crime. And we built 4 scenarios that are described on those 2 axes. The axis, the ordinate here is attitudes toward crime, from liberal to conservative. And the abscissa is economic intensity of the country, from low to high. Lousy economy, good economy. And out of the permutations of those extremes, we formed 4 scenarios. The one in the upper right, for example, was a lousy economy and a conservative public, conservative attitudes toward crime. Well, there the scenario said, I don't care if your budget was low, catch those guys, build that machine. Down in the lower left, where we have liberal people but a low economy, it's a good thing you didn't build a bigger machine. You couldn't build it anyhow, but it's a good thing you didn't. Over on the high economy side, conservative, the public says, here we've got the big machine and the high economy. The public says, terrific, for once we got what we needed. And in the lower right, there's a public outcry, big brother fascism. All right, so what good does that do? We build the 4 scenarios, we write them up, they're great reading. What good does it do? Here's what good it does. If I can find some strategies that work in those 4 vastly different worlds, and they are good bets. Those strategies are independent of the worlds in which they are implemented. So here's the power of scenarios. It's not just to imagine those worlds. It's to find policies that work no matter where you put them. No matter how the world turns out, these are good bets. These are things we ought to be doing. It doesn't matter what the economy does. It doesn't matter what attitudes of crime are. Build the computer this way. And that's what we did. So I've introduced a couple of ideas to you here. One is the idea of scenario space. When you're building scenarios, you want to think first about the dimensions of those scenarios and how they differ. You want to force yourself into a regimen which includes the same thing in every scenario, but gives it from a different perspective, gives it from the perspective of that world you're describing. And as a final step in scenario writing, you want to develop policies, you want to develop strategies that are robust. And by robust, what I mean is they work no matter how the world really turns out. It's powerful. It's a very powerful technique. And the building of the scenarios is often as important as what they say in the end, because it requires groups of people usually working together to imagine futures for your organization and the world that surrounds your organization, so that there's a shared spirit of the future that emerges from that work. There's a difference between accuracy and precision. Right? A Delphi can be very precise and very inaccurate. Right? Accuracy and precision are 2 distinct concepts here. And while we like to go back and say how accurate were we were damn precise, but how accurate were we? The answer is we're pretty good. Pretty good. When people say, why should I believe futures research? Tell me what the batting average is before I want to commit my resources to it. That's an acceptable question and a reasonable question. And the answer, in my judgment, is when we're talking about scientific and technological things, the batting average is about 2/3. Very good, I think. 2/3 in terms of what it was that we forecasted that happened at about the time that it was expected to. What we don't answer in that way is how many things happened that weren't forecasted. Lots. Lots. We went to this group and said, tell us about the important things. Here's the list. But there have been some attempts to answer the question, what happened that wasn't forecasted, but they've been few and far between. Yes,
Is that a meaningful statement in terms of the fact that you're taking an aggregate for that 2/3 of every study that's ever been done?
Yeah.
That doesn't represent an investment strategy in futures.
No, and furthermore, if you change my dimension from science and technology to social science or political science, the batting average would be very low. Very low. Anything dealing with fashion, anything dealing with decisions that can be made without much history behind them. That there's no momentum there. There's nothing that carries you forward. Remember, momentum is an important concept here. These guys, when they gave us these answers, were telling us what they read about and what they thought about. Not what they hadn't read about and what they hadn't thought about. And they knew that there was a laboratory process going on somewhere. There was research underway, or could be. I guess for Arthur Clarke, who was a member of this group, he was thinking about some of the science fiction stories he had not yet written, but would. So batting average is a strange question, an admissible question, difficult to answer. The way I answer it is the way I started, and then go on to say, but it doesn't have to be accurate to be useful. For example, Malthus's and later the Club of Rome's forecast on reaching a limit to the production of food where population outpaces food. Remember that work? That was late 60s, I guess, early 70s. Was wrong. Just wrong. It was wrong. But it was extremely useful to understand the dynamics of the system which could lead to that kind of conclusion, and the necessity for getting a handle on population growth, and for watching agricultural productivity, and for starting to address problems of distribution of food, and so on. So forecasts can be wrong and yet useful to the decision process. This comes from the work of Tversky and Kahneman, who you ought to look up if this is at all interesting to you, because there's a big literature here. Entirely different field, but very applicable to what we're dealing with. This is a question that was given to executives. Sam is a shy, retiring, meek, helpful, and tidy person. What is his occupation most likely to be? Salesman or librarian? The answer, 2/3 of all executives chose librarian. Yet note this, there are 14 million salesmen and 188,000 librarians. So a better bet would have been to say salesman. Right? So you've got a stereotype in your mind leading you to this answer. And maybe he is a librarian, but it would be unusual if he were, because the odds are he's a salesman. The odds are he's something different than either. Brokers talk about profits in commodities, but a better question is what percentage of people who buy commodities lose? 70%. When you go to a doctor and the doctor says, the odds that you have of death, your chances of dying given this procedure are 30%. Think about that. Or he says, your chances of surviving this procedure are 70%. Exactly the same information has been conveyed to you, but your decision process is very different based on the way that information has been conveyed. And we see a lot of statistics presented that way, incidentally. Odds are ignored. Any data is persuasive. Any data is persuasive. 22.37% is the number that is associated with that. 23.7% of the time, any data is persuasive. Have I persuaded you with that? You understand what I mean. We put money in, we have mental pockets. We go to the casino and we gamble in the morning and we win. And we go back in the afternoon and we start to lose. And what do we say to ourselves? Doesn't matter, I'm gambling with the casino's money. No, it's your money. And it's just as important to you in the afternoon as it was in the morning. Value is situationally dependent. Here's the example of that. Um, so say you want to buy a stereo set, and it costs $1,000, and you find a place 6 blocks away where it's $990, $10 different. You might very well go the 6 blocks and buy the cheaper stereo set. Now you're going to buy a BMW, and the BMW is $35,000 even next door, and it's $34,990, $10 cheaper, 6 blocks away. You say to yourself, screw it, I'm going to buy it next door. Why walk 10 blocks, 6 blocks for $10? But you did it for the stereo set, and you didn't do it for the BMW. It's the same $10. The situations that your mind is thinking in percentages. Why isn't it thinking in terms of the dollars? And finally, we go to great lengths to avoid loss. Canceling a project is a lot harder than starting a project. Admitting that you were wrong is terrible, and there's statistical data to back that up. Managing a chaotic system is an art not yet understood. But there are certain rules. The last paper I wrote on chaotic systems involved taming a chaotic system for management. And one of the rules is, I think this works everywhere, slow it down. If you have a high-speed system, your ability to control it diminishes. And if you slow it down, then your ability to reach stability improves. Which is a little worrisome observation, because all of the systems we have tend to speed up decision-making, to give you faster feedback, to give you faster iterations. The money speeds around the world on systems that are instantaneous now. And if those systems are complex and nonlinear, which is the requirement, the systems are nonlinear and recursive, which is the requirement, they can go unstable. That's not to say they will be. I can find values of k that are very stable. But some values of k above 3.5 produce this kind of result. Meaning that if we have chaotic systems, if we have complex systems, nonlinear complex systems, be very careful in trying to manage them. If you're in a region of, even if it looks stable, you may still be in a fake region of stability. I can make that curve look stable by choosing the right k. But then I change it one part in 10 million, and it goes unstable. That if we devote our full attentions to problems of the moment and restrict ourselves to that horizon, then we are shortchanging the future. There ought to be things that we are working on now, so that when the future materializes, we can say, we've got something that can address that problem, not, gee, we're surprised by that.